Hey everyone, and welcome to day 181 of Bible 365. If you are joining me for the first time, I am reading through the Bible in 365 days in chronological order, and I am using the reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com. You would go and download the chronological reading plan because they have a whole bunch, and then you would just read along with me. So it's a free reading plan. You would use that, read along with me. Today we are on day 181. It is June 29th. And our reading today is Isaiah 121 through 530. So, for those of you who have been here before, quick background. We are in the kingdom of Judah and Israel. So the nation is divided, northern kingdom, southern kingdom. And this is the point where Israel has been the northern kingdom. Hearing that plane come in. The northern kingdom has been taken over by the king of Assyria. And so now it's sort of like that northern kingdom has been taken over. Prophets have prophesied that it would be taken over. And now God is shouting out through his prophets that Judah is in trouble as well. Judah is the southern kingdom. They have been led by some good kings and some bad kings, right? So some, by good and bad, I mean kings who follow the Lord versus kings who didn't follow the Lord, right? Kings that the Lord considered righteous because they were following him faithfully, or the kingdoms that were unrighteous, that were turned away from him. And of course, I don't mean momentary sin, but I mean as a general rule, they are following other gods. They are ignoring the God of the universe, and they're following others, sacrificing to them, and just doing the wrong thing overall. So this is where we are. This prophet's name is Isaiah. So he was a pretty famous prophet. I think people who even don't read their Bible on the regular probably know of the prophet Isaiah, mostly because a lot of his prophecies look like they are about Jesus. And so we've seen a couple of those things. We've seen like born of a virgin and things like that. So we've seen a couple of those areas, and like a king that is coming. This area today is basically focused on Judah and how Judah has done horrible things. And because of that, they're going to, well, I think in this section, I feel like God is giving them an opportunity to turn around. He's kind of like, Israel was taken, take note, this is kind of what's coming for you, and you kind of need to turn this around. Let me tell you the reasons why this is coming for you there. So we're continuing Isaiah 1 today. So yesterday he finished in a little section where he said, wash and make yourselves clean, take the evil deeds out of my sight, stop wrongdoing, learn to do what is right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, and plead the case of the widow. So he's telling them of all the ways in which they need to turn towards him and away from serving anything else, right? Like, these are the ways. It is not about your sacrifices. It's really about following the Lord with all of your heart and soul. And these are the things that God asks when you are doing that. So we're following along, and now we're in Isaiah 1, but it's starts in verse 21. It says, see how the faithful city has become a prostitute. So here we go again with this language that it is somebody who is selling themselves to essentially what they deem a high bidder, right, for whatever it might be. And it says, she was once full of justice, righteousness used to dwell in her, but now murderers dwell in her. And he's talking about the nation of Judah, right? So he's talking about that lower kingdom. And it says, your silver has become, in my version, it says dross, which essentially means useless. And so he's like, your silver has become useless. Your wine is diluted. Your rulers are rebels. You're partnering with thieves. They all love bribes. They chase after gifts. They do not defend the cause of the fatherless. And because of this, therefore, he's going to vent his wrath on his foes. So because of all of these things that he's just listed, God is now going to kind of seek vengeance on his people. He's going to destroy and take down all of these areas that are doing this, right? And then he follows up and he says in verse 25, I will thoroughly purge away your worthlessness and remove all of your impurities. So this is kind of a theme I've been building on over the past few days, that him doing this is not doing it to punish because he hates them, because he no longer wants relationship with them. He's doing this actually because he loves them. And so by doing this, he's actually cleaning them in order to bring them back into righteousness, right? Because they're so dirty and unrighteous at this point. They're so busy following the things that they want to follow that they've forgotten their God and what it means to be clean according to God, right? So and again, it's that sort of list of things that he gave them before. So when we move on, it says, afterward, after all these things happen, You will be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. In verse 27, it says, Zion will be delivered with justice. And we've heard the term Zion before. And I'm thinking in this area, like, so Zion, I feel in some ways it's this future, because like Mount Zion, right? We've had a couple of these things with Zion. I feel like it's this future clean place in which they are. So it says Zion will be delivered. So this future cleanliness will be delivered with justice, her penitent ones with righteousness. But rebels and sinners will both be broken. So Zion's going to be delivered. The rebels and sinners are going to be broken. So he's going to do all of these things to the nation of Judah. And then Zion, which I feel like is the ones that are looking towards God, but maybe just not fulfilling the things that they're supposed to be doing, they're going to be delivered, right? And the other ones are going to be broken. So there is a difference, right? Like it's hard, like visually for me, it's really hard to understand, because in some way, I mean, I feel like I have a more colorful mind, right? Lots of shades of gray, but in some ways, like black and white, right? Like you follow the Lord and you go to heaven. You don't follow the Lord and you burn in hell, right? Like these are sort of like these ideas that permeate through scripture, but in here it's hard to understand. Like, so Zion is going to be punished because they're not following, but they're also going to be restored because he's going to purge them of all the unrighteousness that they have. But then these sinners, these ones that like don't want to turn towards the Lord, they're just going to be broken. So there's this area in which maybe even in our own lives that's true, right? Like maybe there's a cleanliness, a cleaning that needs to be done in our lives in order to bring out the Zion in us. And I'm saying these things, I'm not sure of them, right? Just as I'm reading it's not extremely crystal clear, right? That like, oh, Zion is what's going to happen in the future, and there's going to be a kingdom, and it's going to be called Zion, and everyone in there is going to be perfect, and they're all going to love the Lord, right? Like, it's not clear. And I think when we have this idea that it is that everything is clear and we know exactly what's going to happen, that's when we start to get lost, right? Because we can see in the future that the Pharisees got lost with that kind of thing. So that's just what it looks like to me. Like there is some kind of purging that needs to be done, even amongst those that love the Lord, right? And I guess that would be true for me too, that I love the Lord and I try to follow the Lord, but there definitely is still unrighteousness in me, right? There is definitely still sin that's sort of crouching at the door and waiting just to kind of rear its ugly head, right? Because it's sort of sitting right here in the beginning. So it says, going right into Isaiah 2, it says, this is what Isaiah says concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So he's sort of continuing this prophecy with that. And then he starts talking about the last days. And again, this to me is slightly unclear. What is the last days? He's talking now to the kingdom of Israel. This is, for us now, this is 15 to 1700 years before right now, right? This is 700 about years before Jesus. So what this is at least I think 100 years before they come back from Assyria. So, or maybe even more than that. So what necessarily are the last days in which he's talking about? And these are the kind of things that I want to parcel through a little bit. So it says, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established. So here we go. Something is going to be established. Some mountain is going to be established as the highest of the mountains, and this mountain will be exalted above the hills. So whatever it is that we're looking at now, car passed by, whatever it is that we're looking at now, like you know, I'm obsessed with Colorado, and so like Pikes Peak, right? We look at that and we go, wow. For those of you who have been like on Mount Fuji or Fiji or whatever, you know, some of those like extraordinarily high mountains, I'm sure you look at that and you think, people are dying up on those mountains. They're so high and they're so dangerous and treacherous. What could be better than that? Well, the Lord's mountain is going to be even higher than that, right? And then all the nations are going to stream to this mountain. So whatever is still here, they're all going to go to that mountain. And then many people are going to say, come, let us go to the mountain, right? And then the law is going to go out from Zion. Is Zion this people group that he may have been talking about the chapter before, like the purged and clean people group? Or is Zion where God dwells? Right? Again, I'm sort of putting it out there. Love to hear your thoughts when you read this. And then it says, and this I thought was still really interesting, it says in verse 4, he will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many people. I want to keep going on and come back to this. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. So there's going to be some truth to the fact that violence is going to be gone, right? Like, people are not going to solve issues violently. They're not going to go to war against each other. They're not going to have duels with each other. They're not going to beat each other up, right? Like, these things are not going to be in existence anymore. However, that being said, in verse 4, it says, he will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples, which means there will still be disputes. So is it going to be that this disputes aren't sinful disputes? It's just disagreements against people, right? Like, there's some kind of picture to me that says we're still going to be different in this Zion, right? Those of us who love the Lord, like, there's still going to be differences to us, right? We still won't necessarily have this perfect harmony in each other, but God is going to settle all of those disputes. And he's going to settle it in a way in which we're not going to be drawn to violence against each other, right? We're just going to look to the Lord for any of those settlings, right? So for any of the settles of the disputes. And so just this image of what it's going to look like. And I know a lot of times what we seem to think it looks like is just sitting up in clouds and playing the harp, because those are the pictures that we've gotten. And that doesn't seem to, like, if, at least for me, when it says in those last days, right? Are they the days before the days to come, or, right? Like, because I think people still will be in war with each other even until the very end. As a matter of fact, it might look even worse at the very end. So just these, just these pictures, what do they necessarily mean, or what are your thoughts on them? All right, so moving down here, and then he says, you, Lord, have abandoned your people. So he's kind of said, this is what the last days are going to look like. And then he's moving on to what's going to happen soon. You've abandoned your people, the descendants of Jacob. They are full of superstitions from the east. So God has sort of gone like, okay, I'm leaving them to whatever it is that they want to do. But it says in verse 7, their land is full of silver and gold. So they're not poor and miserable, right? So the Lord is left. But it doesn't mean that it's not, again, here we go with black and white. It's not black and white. Like, if you don't live with the Lord, then you're going to be broke and miserable and fighting with everyone. And that's not true. We can tell by looking around that people we know that don't follow the Lord, that aren't miserable and depressed all the time. And people that we know love the Lord sometimes are like that, right? And I know that's not what we desire, but that just, if we kind of are comparing apples to apples, right? So he's saying, not that everything is miserable, right? It says their land is full of horses and there's no end to their chariots. It also says their land is full of idols. They bow down to the work of their hands. Because of that, people will be brought low, right? So it says, so people will be brought low and everyone humbled. Do not forgive them. And it's because of, they've just kind of gotten it all. They've taken it all. They want it all. And they don't look to the Lord in anything. Verse 12, it says, the Lord Almighty has a day in store. And then going down to verse 17, it says, where the arrogance of man will be brought low and human pride humbled. I know I've consistently been saying this, but I want to reiterate over and over and over again that some of our biggest sins are in the sin of pride. Anything that we consider doing on our own, any time we turn away from the Lord and turn towards ourselves, any time that no matter what, we have to put ourselves first, right? So we're worshiping self over worshiping anything else. When that happens, that is a great sin against the Lord. And I'm sure some of you are like, well, I can do it a little bit, right? Like, I can be proud of the work that I do. I can have pride in my kid, right? Like, I hear all of your, because I say that kind of stuff to myself as well. I grew up learning that, right? Like, have pride in the things that you do, right? Be proud of what you've become. Okay. And so I grew up with that. And that's a lie to ourselves that is deeming self-value and self-worth the most important thing in our lives. And it is not. So it feels good at the time, right? Like, so I'm proud of the work that I've done. Wow, look at all that I accomplished. Wow, man, I am, or I look this certain way, and I want to make sure that other people accept me. So I have pride in the way in which I look. I dress a certain way. I whatever it is, I have pride in the way that I look. So I esteem myself in a certain place. And if you only feel good when you're doing that, you've lost actually your genuine value, which is your value in the Lord, right? So actually you don't have any self-worth. You only have worth in what you're putting on the outside. So it, it seems at the time to make sense, but overall in God's kingdom, pride is in the Lord, right? And all things come from the Lord. Humility is in us accepting that and recognizing that. And peace comes from that humility in accepting that it all comes from the Lord. I didn't, one of the things I like about myself is my hair. I didn't give myself my hair. Now I can get it cut a certain way, I can style it a certain way, right? But like, I can color it, right? I've done all these things, but like the texture, the consistency, how much of it I have, like all of that is really due to the Lord, right? Like that's just my genetic code in play that was created by the Lord. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So we've just got to be careful about human pride because we let it sneak in these tiny, tiny ways. And then it becomes this big monster. And that's the thing that we need to fight, the demon. So when these things happen, when the Lord brings these people low, it says they're going to flee to caves. They're going to run away, right? They're going to throw away stuff that they have. Like they're going to be really scared. And then in verse 22, he says, so stop trusting in mere humans who have but a breath in their nostrils. Here we go with having that pride in yourself. Stop trusting in all of that. None of that matters. It's fleeting. It's meaningless, right? Why hold them in esteem? So then we go next into Isaiah 3, where he has judgment against Judah. So we kind of go over all of his judgment. And it says, I find this fascinating because of the way in which we live right now. In verse 4, it says, all your like really like important special people, like your warriors and your really smart people and your prophets, and all that's going to be trashed. Like that's all gone, taken away, all of that. And I'm going to have, it says in verse 4, I'm going to make mere youths their officials. Children will rule over them. So all of like your top people, children are going to rule over them. Now, could it be literal children? Maybe. Could it be what they deem children, which is like the inexperienced and the young, right? And I literally see that everywhere. I'm not saying this has to do with today. I'm not saying that, but just looking at the cycles and the things that perpetuate. Right now, it seems like youth is esteemed over wisdom over and over and over again, right? And so those that we would have deemed experienced in their field or their business or their industry, youths are coming in and like training them and saying, well, I know that you think like this, but you know, you got that all wrong and you got to start thinking the way that we think. And so I just found this interesting, and it there's another section in this same area, and it says, sorry, I got to open this up. So it says, because they're now all worried, and it started to say like, woe to them. And it says in verse 10, tell the righteous, it will be well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked. And then in verse 12, it says, youths oppress my people, women rule over them. Now, at the time where that was not the case, right? Like, especially amongst Israelites, the men ruled. They were ruled is probably, I want to say that's a wrong statement, but it's probably the proper statement. It just kind of tweaks against my nature. The men were always the elders. The men were always the priests, not always the prophets, because there were a lot of women prophets, but the men were the ones in ruling power at the time. And so it says in this, there's going to be a turn. And by the way, it's not good. It's not that it's a good turn. Those who were in power are going to be taken out of power, and those who are not in power are going to be that in some ways shouldn't be in power are now going to rule over those that have always been in power. Now, it doesn't say what reason. So if we look today, right? So like if we kind of take like a snapshot of today, some of the reasons, and I'm just being frank as a woman who grew up in this time, some of the reasons that these things I feel like are happening is because those who were in charge made such a mess of it, right? And so there's something to be said about all parties being responsible for it turning in the wrong direction, right? Like So men didn't rule well. They oppressed women and children, right? And so they didn't rule in a godly way. And so because of that, people started to stand up and they started to recognize that that wasn't good for them and they were being oppressed. And so they started to pull themselves up and out of that, right? The only issue, of course, is that it is disorder. So yes, I'm going to say for us now in this time, what's happening could be really good, but in some ways it's deemed as disorder. Now, what that means in the grand scheme of things, it's hard to say. So if everyone starts calling on the Lord again, it could mean that men start to rule in a very orderly, godly way, and then that would be good for everyone. Right? Then no one would need to kind of break themselves out of what they would consider a good place to be, because it would be a good place to be because proper order would be ruling well. So I just want to be really careful. It's not like necessarily like that men and women killed and slaughtered all the men and then took over, although it could have been, but it's not necessarily saying that. So there could be any number of reasons why it's out of order, but he's just noting that it's going to be out of order, right? Like God's order looks like this, and now we're going to see that it's going to look like that, which means it's bad and everything is being taken down. So then in verse 13, it says, the Lord takes his place in court. He rises to judge the people. He enters into the judgment against the elders and the leaders of his people. So you see, he's kind of knocking them down off there because they haven't done anything. He said, it's because you who have ruined my vineyard, right? Like you guys have done the wrong thing. And because you've done the wrong thing, chaos is going to ensue and all these bad things are going to happen. We move down into verse 16. It says, the Lord says, the women of Zion are haughty. They're walking with outstretched necks. Like, again, they're stepping up and out of the place that they're supposed to be. They're flirting with their eyes, strutting along with swaying hips, which I'm assuming in some ways means like they're working outside of what God would deem a reverential way in which that he would love women to walk, right? They're overtly looking towards men and flirting and like doing all these things and very prideful and haughty, right? And they're not supposed to be doing that. And it says, therefore, the Lord will bring sores on their heads of the women, and they're going to make their scalps bald. So it is, and this says the women of Zion. So here we go again. Like, is this a people group or, right? Like, is this believers who he's punishing so they come back to him? And so now we kind of go into this section that is really uncomfortable. And it's like, instead of fragrance, there will be a stench. Instead of a sash, a rope. Like, what's going to happen is going to be wretched. Like, it's going to be unimaginable. And I'm sure somebody of you guys can picture certain things of war and all of these other things, but it's going to be really bad. And so it gets to the point where it says in chapter 4:1, it says, in that day, because it's just so bad and so much death, so much destruction, torture, and all these awful things. And in that day, 7 women are going to take hold of one man. So what it looks like is it looks like so many men are gone. These women are like, hey, listen, I had to look at this, by the way, in a different version. So my version says, in that day, 7 women will take hold of one man and say, we will eat our own food and provide our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name and take away our disgrace. I have 2 things for this. One is obviously literal. It's going to be that so many guys are gone that women are trying to get a name, right? They're trying to have a last name and something to have for themselves. And so they say, listen, you don't need to provide. We'll provide everything for us. So I went into the New Living Translation, which kind of spoke it out a little bit better than that. But I also see, because it says take away our disgrace, which again, like I was talking about in Hosea with Gomer, the husband does take away a woman's disgrace, right? By marrying her, he makes her clean. So they're a clean unit together. But in the same thing, this is all these people going to the Lord and saying, we'll do whatever, right? We just want your name again, right? We just want you. Take away our disgrace. So I also think it's a visual for what God is going to do for us after this time, right? In those days. And then in chapter 4, it says in verse 2, it says, in that day, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land will be the pride and glory of the survivors of Israel. So again, we're talking about future time. This area is now going to be beautiful. So after he has brought it to laid it to waste, and it's been destroyed and destruction, and he's bringing everything back, he's starting to say what is going to look like. It's going to say in verse 4, the Lord will wash away the filth of the women, the filth of the women of Zion. Again, Zion. He will cleanse the bloodstains from Jerusalem by a spirit of judgment and a spirit of fire. So it's going to be painful. Verse 5, then the Lord will create over all of Mount Zion and over those who assemble there a cloud of smoke by day and a glow of flaming fire by night. Over everything the glory will be a canopy. It will be a shelter and a shade from the heat of the day and a refuge and hiding place from the storm and rain. This is a visual of all that we have read. If you have not been with me, please go back, because this is a visual of Exodus. In Exodus is where he has them create the tabernacle, right? The tent. And so they're covered, right, in the tabernacle. And the Lord is covered in the tabernacle. And then he shows up in a cloud by day and in a fire by night, right? So he's reminding them this is still another picture and an image of God and who he is, right? Moving down to this last chapter in Isaiah 5, it says, I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones. And so now this is what I see when I look at this. I see that Canaan is the vineyard, right? So he says, I will sing for the one I love, which is Israel, right? So the Lord is singing to Israel, whom he loves. And it's about his vineyard, which is, to me, the land of Canaan or the land of Israel, right? That eventually becomes Israel. And so he's singing about this land, right? He cleans it out. He makes it look beautiful. And then they mess it up. And then he says, and I'm going to take away its hedge. It's going to be destroyed. I'm going to break down its wall. I'm going to make it a wasteland, right? So this is to remind them. And then it says, the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but he saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but he heard cries of distress. So this is what they have done to him. He created this because he loved them, and they destroyed it, right? They destroyed it right in front of him, right under his nose, him living in, dwelling with them, and they destroyed it. And so now he starts to do these woes. Woe to you who add house to house. So adding a lot. Woe to those who rise early in the morning, right? Woe to, it says, therefore death expands its jaws, right? Woe to those who draw sin along with cords of deceit. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Super, super famous verse. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine. He lifts up a banner. So those are all his people. He lifts up a banner for distant nations. So now this is Assyria coming in and destroying them. So woe to all his people who messed up and stopped following him. He's now lifting up these other nations. They're coming in. It says their arrows are sharp. They're like lions. They're destroying everything. I'm finishing it in this. They're destroying everything in Judah. And then in verse 30 it says, in that day they will roar over Israel like the roaring of the sea. And if one looks at the land, there is only darkness and distress. Even the sun will be darkened by clouds. And this is how we end Isaiah today, with this letter to Israel that's essentially like, your future is not going to be good. There is going to be a time, because of all you've done, that you are going to be in a land of destruction. And so this is something that they either listen to or don't listen to, prepare for or don't prepare for. And then we're going to see what happens with his prophecies tomorrow. So guys, if you've liked this, I want you to hit the like button. So if it's been a blessing to you, hit the like button, share it, subscribe to the channel, and then keep reading, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.